My next guest is the first Indigenous American to serve as a cabinet secretary in the United States. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so Secretary, just to start off with, you weren't only the first Indigenous American to serve as a cabinet secretary, but you were also one of the first Indigenous Americans to serve in Congress, along with Congresswoman Sharice Davids. And then, of course, we know that Congresswoman Mary Peltola, an Indigenous Alaskan, is now serving in Congress. I want to get your take on what is needed in terms of representation of Indigenous communities in Congress or in legislatures, really in countries like Canada, for example, Latin America, because it seems that while we obviously celebrate these first, obviously major achievements, it's not enough. And I can't believe in the year of our Lord, 2023, we're still naming first like this.
Absolutely. And you know, when I won my election to Congress, one of the first two Native women in Congress after over 200 plus years, the first thing I said was, I'm the first, but I don't want to be the last. So it's important that we continue to do everything we can, right? Representation matters. And I mean, I think there are Indigenous children out there, Indigenous girls who will never know what it's like to not have a Native American woman in Congress, and so, or in the cabinet, perhaps. So it's up to us to make sure that we are always doing what we can to make sure that we have a voice, and that is helping folks to recognize their own voice and helping them to realize that they can be a voice for their communities as well.
So where does that start in terms of reaching out to those young Indigenous girls and members of the Indigenous community in general, going into, recruiting them to run for office? I mean, do you think this is something that, more organizations, outside organizations with recruiting candidates need to get involved? Do you think there's an infrastructure for that right now as we speak?
Well, in my position now, the Bureau of Indian Affairs is part of this department, the Department of the Interior. So I travel to Indian country often for various issues, for natural resource issues, for the Bureau of Indian Education issues. We travel to Indian country often and meet with tribes as often as we can. And I feel like, part of it is, yes, we're going to get the work done, but I feel that if people are inspired, then they will want to be involved as well. So it's a matter of us making sure that we help people to know how important their voices are.
One of your initiatives that is obviously so incredibly important is the establishment of the Missing and Murdered Unit, obviously targeted towards, trying to alleviate the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous young women and girls and, women of all ages, obviously, in this country. I wanted to get your take on that issue because on one hand, I think this isn't an issue we talk about enough, but on the other hand, I see this issue being portrayed and, increasingly in the media. Yellowstone, Dexter, Alaska Daily. These are all television shows that have had storylines about this issue. You hear it, covered a bit more in the media. But the problem doesn't really seem to get better. Would love to hear about how the Missing and Murdered Unit is going to alleviate or, solve ultimately this problem, or if it can.
Absolutely. So we started the Missing and Murdered Unit here at the department because we felt that it was important that we dedicate professionals to solving these crimes. And we've had opportunities to solve missing persons cases, murder cases. We've been able to, give families the information that they've been longing to hear in some respects. And so it's always important that we continue to move forward with this unit to solve the cases that were forgotten about. One of the reasons I came to Congress in the first place was to elevate this issue. And I remember being in my home, in my city of Albuquerque, going to, we'd have these rallies where maybe 10 people would show up to bring attention to missing and murdered Indigenous people. Now it's clearly a mainstream issue. The more people that talk about it, the more attention gets paid to it. While I was in Congress, I was able to get a bill passed called the Not Invisible Act, and now we're implementing the Not Invisible Act Commission here at the department, bringing in members of the communities, members of law enforcement, survivors, and the families of survivors to huddle, to talk about what it is that we can do to make this issue better, the steps we need to take to make sure that our people do not go missing in the first place, but how can we solve these issues in the best possible way? So yes, thank you for recognizing that attention is definitely being paid to this, and we just need to keep working at it.
I think a lot of non-Indigenous people, when they hear about this issue, the first thought they have, and they're pretty unfamiliar with the background, is why Indigenous women and girls? Why is this problem still persisting, or why has it persisted in the first place? Obviously, I'm sure a book could be written on this topic. There have been books written on this topic, I believe, about generational trauma, colonization. But in your view, why is this a huge problem in Indian country in North America as well as in Latin America?
Well, for one thing, it's an issue that's been happening for the past 500 years. From the first time colonizers came to the North American continent, they have been stealing women, stealing girls, stealing children. It's happened over and over again. And so it's not an issue, it's been persistent for this long. We're working on the boarding school initiative, and quite frankly, a lot of those children were just taken from their families, taken away and sent off to boarding school. Sometimes their families would never see them again for as long as they lived. This has been a persistent issue, as I said, for the last 500 years. And so we're going to keep working at it, because for an issue that's lasted for this long, it's going to take a concerted effort. It won't be solved with one law or one policy, but rather a group of policies, a group of laws, and all of us need to be dedicated to seeing its end. So we'll keep working at it, and I'm very happy to be in a position I am to move this issue forward.
What's it like working with state and local governments on this issue? Because as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the problem area of this issue lies in that a lot of these, tribal lands are sort of situated in places where the jurisdiction isn't unclear, and it's unclear, who faces justice, who doesn't face justice. If you're non-Indigenous, you commit a crime, who are you reporting to in that case? Has there been efforts to really clarify that?
Well, absolutely. Jurisdictional issues are always a big headache with regard to Indian country and who has jurisdiction. So we'll keep working at that. I am pleased to know that many states, in fact, have worked hard on this issue. The state governments are working with their tribal communities and their tribal nations to work together to solve the issue. My home state of New Mexico has a missing and murdered Indigenous peoples task force. I know in Wyoming, the governor there has worked with two tribes to bring this issue to light. A lot of these, kidnappings, a lot of these murders, they happen in very remote locations. So that means that we need to do our best to make sure that, tribal police forces are trained in how to respond, and that we can connect our communities with internet, right? Mm-hmm. That's been one of the issues all along as well, that remote Indian tribes haven't had the connections they need to make phone calls or to report something. So the more, it's not just it's not a one, you can't solve this, as I said, with one issue. It's going to take a concerted effort across the government to make sure that all of us are working together to have the infrastructure that we need, to have the law enforcement that we need, to make people aware. And so I am committed to this work, and we'll keep doing what we're doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Secretary Haaland, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and talk about this issue that is, I can't believe we're still talking about it now. It's awful that we have to talk about it in the first place, but thank you for joining us and really helping us shed a light on it.
And thank you very much for shedding the light on it.